Loving God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be pleasing to you this morning. May your Spirit move so that we hear your call to embody your love in the world. Amen. Please be seated. And good morning. It's a great blessing to be with you all today, and a great gift to be supporting this community throughout this summer as Father Christopher is away on his sabbatical. I'm not certain, but this may be the first time that I have preached at St. Stephen's without Father Christopher's impressive presence, parsing over every word from just over there. And so we will see what kind of trouble we can get into this morning without Christopher knowing. And let's be honest, in a lot of ways, today's gospel passage is troublesome. In our reading from Matthew, Jesus offers a glimpse of the kingdom of heaven as a planter who sows good seed. But what so often draws our attention is not the wheat, it's not the fruit of the field or those good seeds, but the weeds. And when we think of weeds, we think of spurge and crabgrass, thistle and foxtail. We think of all that is unwelcome in our gardens. We think of growth that is out of place, that is invasive and unruly. And if you're like me, the mere thought of weeds can make you itch, just remembering the oily reprisal of poison oak from the barest touch. And the loathsome connotation of weeds can have us echoing the accusation of the workers to the sower. Did you not sow good seed? For a long time, Christians have looked at the parable of the weeds. We've read the panicked question of the gardeners to the planter. Should we gather these invasive plants before they overtake the whole field? And like the disciples, we've been baffled by the planter's reply. Let both of them grow together until the harvest. And at harvest time, I will tell the reapers, collect the weeds first, bind them in bundles to be burned, but gather the wheat into my barn. And so when we read Jesus' explanation, we respond with relief. Of course, we say to ourselves, this is a story of God's judgment. We are the children of heaven. We will be the ones who shine like the sun in the kingdom of the Father. Those others, well, they'll be weeping, there will be gnashing of teeth. They'll burn in the fiery furnace. And somehow that categorization is so orderly. It's clean. It's like a perfectly manicured field. But when we look closely, that's not actually what we've read, is it? So often our impulse is to look at this passage as a glimpse of God's righteous judgment. But the troublesome thing is, perhaps what we're really being offered in this passage is a glimmer of God's unfathomable grace. Today's psalm tells us, "But you, O Lord, are gracious and full of compassion, slow to anger, and full of kindness and truth." The wisdom of Solomon proclaims, "O God, your strength is the source of righteousness, and your sovereignty over all causes you to spare all." You are sovereign in strength. You judge with mildness. When I read these things, I think of the words of the book of Hebrews. God disciplines us for our good in order that we may share in God's holiness. No discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful. Later on, however, it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have been trained by it. Therefore, since we are receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken, let us be thankful and so worship God acceptably with reverence and awe. And this is the good part. For our God is a consuming fire. I think of the verses that we skip over in our lectionary today. If you look closely at your bulletin, you'll see that there are passages left out as we move from the parable of the weeds to Jesus' explanation of the parable of the weeds. I think of the parable of the mustard seed, which appears right after the parable of the weeds. A story in which Jesus insists that the kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed planted in a field. A noxious weed planted in a garden. A weed that springs from the smallest of all seeds, yet when it grows, it is the largest of garden plants and becomes even a tree, so that the birds can come and perch in its branches and rest in its shade. And that, of course, brings us back to the sower, who says, leave the weeds. Leave the weeds. Let them grow with the wheat until the harvest. This is not clean and easy. It's messy. It's wild. It's troublesome. And I believe that is exactly what Jesus is trying to tell us about God's grace. Last night, I rewrote the sermon that I had prepared for this morning. I had written a perfectly good message earlier this week before taking off for 4 days backpacking in the Sierras. And while I was hiking through the backcountry and sleeping under the stars, a constant companion was a family of marmots. These big, stocky ground squirrels that seem to have the run of the land up in the mountains. I'd see them scurrying from rock to rock. I'd hear them calling out to one another in this strange, piercing whistle like the warning you get when you've forgotten to change the batteries in your smoke alarms. And watching them roam the gorgeous alpine landscape, noting the ways they tended to one another, was a really nice distraction from the sting of my sunburn, from not putting on sunscreen as my wife had advised, and the heavy pack on my back. And one morning, I woke up early and spent some time reading in my tent. I pulled up an old essay that I'd filed away called Practice Losing Everything by writer and philosophy professor Gary Persepi. And as I was reading, I found myself sitting up in my tent, and my eyes started to well up as I read his story of layered loss and the bold assertion in the midst of it, where he says, I believe that Jesus cares a great deal about us, but not always in the ways we expect or want him to care. It is possible to believe that Jesus is the solution to all our problems. But in time, as our faith is tested and matures, we may discover a Jesus who doesn't want to solve our problems. A Jesus who instead invites us to cross over to the land of the other, to create space and extend extravagant hospitality to the people we find there. A Jesus who leads us into danger and creates for us problems. Problems we never would have had we not signed up to follow him in the first place. Gary writes, maybe Christian faith is the determination to stick with Jesus even when he has the audacity to say to you, practice losing everything. He says, maybe all we're really losing is a faith that isn't worth a tinker's dam in a storm. Maybe a shallow faith is a faith well lost. And when I looked up from that essay and felt a swirl of emotions, and I was holding back tears, and I was grateful to be alone in my tent, I saw through the little screen in the door flap a marmot sitting just a few feet away, staring back at me. And in his tiny little paw, he held the stalk of a weed. And he looked right up at me, and he put that weed in his mouth, and he took a big old bite. And it may as well have been wheat. And that complicates everything. Like Jacob and David, I could see so clearly that God was in that place. I could hike to the highest mountain, and God is there. The lowest valley, the nethermost pit, and God is there. In the magnificent spires and peaks, the flowers and streams, God is there. And yet, somehow, in God's mysterious, loving way, God is in the weeds too. And so there I was, laughing and crying and thanking God for marmots and mountains and magnificent grace beyond anything I can understand. And that was troublesome. I find myself really thinking about a God who rejects the easy logic of the world and leaves the weeds with the wheat. Lets them grow and flower and fruit and seed in a tangled knot of free and feral life. The good with the bad. And again, that is troublesome. St. Francis once said that he spoke to an old squirrel about the sacraments, and that the creature just got so excited. Francis smiled and said, "Yes, dear. You understand. Everything imparts God's grace." And somehow, with this troublesome passage, I feel like that's what we need to remember. That the loving God we worship, the compassionate Lord who mercifully gives us those things which for our unworthiness we dare not, and for our blindness we cannot ask. The Creator whose reign is as wild and wonderful as a mustard tree. The wise planter who sows good seed also scatters unimaginably abundant grace that can make even what we see as weeds brilliant and blessed things. So today, may the wheat make the bread for this table, and may the weeds shelter birds and fill the bellies of the marmots. And may God's wild grace fill our hearts, so that the fruit of all our lives is righteousness. Amen.